Well, howdy. So it's great to be with you. I am looking forward to I've enjoyed the discussion today. Um, Before I start, I'd like to ask how many of you have an affiliation with A&M? Either you're part of the faculty or you're a current student or a former student. Would you raise your hands? Okay. So a good part of the audience. That's great. I'd like to thank Dr. Hudson and the rest of you for inviting me to be part of this today. I'm going to give you some reflections of the challenges that I saw when we integrated women into the Corps back in the 70s, because I was the first class that was charged with the implementation of this, because I was a member of Corps staff at the time, and the administration and the commandant had told us that we were going to implement it, and we were going to like it. And so we did. I mean, I think we were good soldiers in terms of trying to move forward. Now, one of the things I'd like to talk about, let me introduce somebody on my staff first. James Edge is with me today, and he is our regional director for the southern part of District 17. So I appreciate him being with me today. The challenge that I think we faced then is the same that the service academies faced when they integrated females into their respective corps of cadets. And also it's the same challenge that the services face today. And I'm going to read a quote because I thought this was pretty amazing. This came from the Minerva Plan, which is what we were following. The class ahead of me and the Corps of Cadets on Corps staff wrote the Minerva Plan. It was mostly a student-driven plan with oversight by the Commandant and by the Vice President of Student Services. But these folks wrote this quote that I thought was particularly compelling about the challenges that we faced. And so bear with me if you will. And it says, quote, "With the advent of ROTC for women at Texas A&M University, we find ourselves confronted with the question of whether or not to extend the same outstanding training to women by allowing them membership in the Corps of Cadets. Admittedly, the consideration of such a question is directly contrary to the established tradition of the Corps, and the view of many individuals could, in effect, destroy the very system which we seek to extend to women." So if you see the challenge that the framers had at the time, the framers of the Minerva Plan is, we want women to have the same great experience that we as males get to have in the Corps of Cadets, but at the same time we wanted to make sure that while we were giving them that experience, we didn't somehow dilute the Corps or hurt its ability to operate moving forward. And so that's the challenge that we faced back in the 70s. That's the challenge that the service academies faced, and I'd say, in my view of the world, that we at the Corps of Cadets had a much easier much more successful integration plan than the service academies did, and that's also what the military faces today. And so, again, just think about that. We want women to have the same great opportunities, the same great experience, but at the same time we need to make sure that that action doesn't cause something to go down. You've seen two different approaches here. You've heard about the Army's approach, which is to have greater effectiveness, readiness at the end of the story. And so they've had an approach that's been very holistic, very driven to try to make sure that they have the same excellent outcomes and preserve the Army or make it better. You've seen the Marine Corps that's had a different view of the world, and they've struggled moving forward. And that's caused some political struggles as well. So with that, I'd like to give you some of the history of what's happened in the integration of women in the Corps. General Ramirez, who was a fish when I was a ZEP or when I was a senior, got to come in on sort of the tail end of the harshest part. Now let me give you some history, and then I'm going to give you kind of an overview of what some of the other underlying currents were at the time. It was in 1963 that the Board of Regents of the institution permitted women to enroll on a limited basis at A&M and also to make the Corps voluntary. That progressed to the point, and in the fall of 1972, women were allowed to be on campus. And the student population of women soared from almost nothing to 10% of the student body. So we had 1,600 women that became part of the university when I was a fish, and that's because they made up about 40% of my class. And so I came in with a class that was very heavy, had a good component of women early on. So that's all I knew. I didn't know the so-called old Army A&M, I guess you would call it at the time. And so that's what I came in with. But there was resentment to that. Those early women that came into A&M, I think, were very hardy. There were no restrooms for females here. A lot of the males didn't like it, and also some of the professors didn't like it. So they entered into what we would call a hostile environment early on. But it was recognized by the Commandant of the Corps and also by the President of the University and the Vice President of Student Services that A&M had to do something. We had a new law in 1972 called Title IX, which said that women and men in higher education had to be treated equally. It was designed more for the athletic side of things, but it became what most institutions began to look at as we've got to apply that across the board. Then the Army kept quizzing our commandant at the time, Tom Parsons, as to what was happening with women, opportunities for women in the Corps Cadets. Well, of course, at that time, they were zero. So the class ahead of me, the class of the Corps staff juniors in 73, 74, wrote the Minerva Plan. And that provided that we were going to start adding women to the Corps the very next year when I was a junior on Corps staff. And so I wasn't part of the planning, but I was part of the execution. So I had to love this plan, if you think about it that way. And the way the plan was designed is that we would do it in small steps. In other words, women would, as you heard General Ramirez say, they would be allowed to come on as a day outfit. They wouldn't be required to wear uniforms. But the women wanted to move much more quickly, and the male part of the Corps wanted to move much more slowly. And the challenge came to a head, and I had to be a champion of this, and I was glad to be a champion of it as a member of the Corps. That was my job. And we had a form of hazing here at the time called quadding. I know General Ramirez knows about it. For the rest of you, what it amounts to is that a bunch of freshmen come grab you and they hold you spread eagle while somebody pours water on your sensitive parts from the second floor of the building. I went through that time after time after time because I was defending the right of women to be in the Corps. As a member of the staff, and so I and the other 5 of us went through this on behalf of women in the Corps. At the end of the day, I think we prevailed, because you've heard we've had 2 female Corps commanders back to back, which is awesome. So again, you had this friction. So you had the males kept saying old Army's going to hell, and you had the females say we want to move faster. And so my response to the males was old Army's been dying since 1876. And because that's all you ever heard about. And so then we had a woman in the Corps that decided that she was going to file a lawsuit under Title IX. And that litigation was filed in 1979. I was already graduated and gone into the private sector by then. And it wasn't settled until 1985. But the ultimate outcome of that, which at the time I didn't appreciate, I was somewhat negative about the judgment, was that the Corps would integrate women into every part, every subunit of the Corps, and it would do it quickly. And I think that turned out to be exactly the right decision to make because it forced the Corps to recognize that women need to be treated equally with men. And so we began this very fast integration. I can't say it was always smooth, but it did work out well. And I think when I give you the contrast with some of the challenges that we've had at the service academies, you can see it worked out well. And I think that even though the service academies also looked at the Minerva Plan, it didn't execute quite as well as we did. I think the Army solution to this follows more of that thoughtful but yet quick integration. Not too quick, but quick enough that it shows measurable progress on a specific periodic timetable. That's something we didn't have in the Minerva Plan. We were going to kind of leave it to say, okay, does this feel good? Let's move to the next step and move on. But now, as you've heard, we've got women in all units. the band, the Ross Volunteers, the drill team, virtually every outfit in the Corps is now integrated. So I'm today, as the General said, women make up 15% of the women in the Corps. Now, I'm going to compare what happened in the service academies. The service academies struggled with integration, and particularly when it came to the safety of women, particularly in sexual assault. The service academies had higher incidence of sexual harassment and sexual assault than A&M. I can't really tell you explain why. I've got two sort of hypotheses about this. Number one is Texas A&M is a Title IX institution, which means we have to give women the same protected rights that you'd give to a male. And so if there's a problem with sexual assault, then that could endanger the Title XI status of this institution. The service academies are exempt from Title IX, so I think that might have played a part in it. The second thing has to do with the culture of the students here. The service academies tend to be much more heterogeneous than Texas A&M. Texas A&M, at that time, the 70s when I was here, tended to draw boys from small towns like me. And we had a way that we viewed that women ought to be treated with respect and to not be harmed, and that they need to be protected. And so I think that was part of it. But the service academies had, again, they had big city folks, small town folks, and also I think the fact that you had a military tradition that was male based. I mean, I don't know if the Secretary of the Air Force, when she was here, was talking about there used to be this fighter jock mentality that dominated the Air Force, which caused some issues with the Air Force in the decade prior to now. And I think some of the same thing happened. You had this, lots of testosterone driven in the way the people that were leading those institutions felt, and so they had more difficulty moving forward. The bottom line is today that it looks like the service academies are doing better. They still have some sexual assault issues. I don't think we have that here at A&M. I'm not heard about it. It seems to be better. And we've got women in with two female Corps Cadet commanders back to back. It seems to me like we finally gotten to where we wanted to be when I started on the front end of this project back in the fall of 1974. So I'm just thrilled with the job that General Ramirez has done. But in particular, he's the head of this, but if you have to think about where does the rubber meet the road in terms of integrating women, it's got to be the student body, cadets. And they have done an exceptional job, and so I appreciate the way that the generations over time have gotten to where they accept this and they understand that these women add real value. In particular, as a person who works with men and women have worked with men and women throughout my career, now in my elected office, I can tell you the women tend to be smarter and more task-oriented than some of the men do. So that brings us back to where I started, and that is this quote that I read before. It says, "With the advent of ROTC for women at Texas A&M University, we find ourselves confronted with the question of whether or not to extend the same outstanding training to women by allowing them membership in the Corps Cadets. Admittedly, the consideration of such a question is directly contrary to the established tradition of the Corps, and in the view of many individuals, could, in effect, destroy the very system which we seek to extend to women." I think we've proven that can work, that you can have the excellence, you can provide women with the excellent program, and you can maintain the readiness, or you can achieve the objectives of the organization. And so I think it's incumbent on all of us, as we look at this issue, not only here in the United States, but all around the world, to know that we can do it. Because if you can do it here at A&M, if you can do it in the service academies, you can do it in the Army, I guarantee you we can do it anywhere. So those are my reflections for today, and I thank you for your time.